Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone here today on this hot afternoon. I commend you for coming out in this terrible heat, but I hope you'll find it well worth it. I'm Heather Lennon, Lennon. I'm the president of the Lancaster Historical Society, and we're partnering with a couple of groups today, the Nashua River Watershed Association, Freedom's Way, and Thayer Memorial Library to present this program. And I want to make a couple of announcements. There is water available. That's our refreshment for the day since the program is about water. And no one should venture upstairs. The library's closed to the public today. And also there are restrooms outside if you go out the door and then to the right. Yeah, the right and then
down the hall.
Yeah, down the hall. You'll find the restrooms there in case you should need that. So I'd like to introduce at this time, this is our last program of the season, Lori Johnson. She is the development director for the Nashua River Watershed Association, a great partner in working this program up. I'd like to say that we will touch on the contribution of Marion Stoddard, who back in the 1960s was very instrumental in making efforts to get this Nashua River cleaned up. And my family has lived in Lancaster for about 4 generations, and we dearly remember as children crossing the Ponacan Bridge to get up to Fort Pond to go swimming in the afternoons and looking down at the water, and it was either blue or yellow or green or orange because there was a plastics factory there at that time. And over the years, of course, we all moved and went our separate ways, but now that I've moved back to Lancaster, I see that the water is clear, and it's all because of those early efforts. Now, she did work with Phyllis Farnsworth and her husband Bill Farnsworth. Representative from their family could not be here today, but I'd like to commend them as well. So Marion is kind of the mother of the Nashua River effort, and the Farnsworths were kind of like the partner, father and husband and wife partner from Lancaster that helped so very much with that effort. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Lori, and then maybe we'll have question and answer later.
I'd like to thank Heather and the Historical Society and Freedom's Way for helping to put this together, and to all of you for being here, as Heather said, on an incredibly hot day. I'm sure that all of you are here to hear about the Nashua River. No one's just seeking some rest in the AC. It does feel really nice in here. It's very appropriate to have a program that links the history of Lancaster and the Nashua River, because the river and the history have been inextricably linked literally for centuries. So this is a shot. Heather was wonderful about coming up with some old postcards from the Historical Society and sharing those for the presentation today. And this is an image of the meeting of the waters here in Lancaster, and that's the confluence where the South Nashua joins the North Nashua coming down from Fitchburg and Leominster, and together they form the main stem of the Nashua River, which then continues to flow south to north until it ends in Nashua when it joins the Merrimack River. According to some of the history we found in the Wild and Scenic Stewardship book and Freedom's Way, this meeting of the waters was a village site of the Nipmuc tribe, which are known as the freshwater people. And they were associated with then the Nashua, which is the river with the beautiful pebble bottom. In 1653, the town was incorporated, and it was called Lancaster on the Nashua, recognizing the importance of the water resource to the community. When the community lines, the geographic lines were established, today there's almost 16 miles of rivers that flow through Lancaster, and that's if you count the 3 sections, the South Nashua, the North Nashua, and the main stem. In the 1770s, the first 100 years, the Nashua really helped Lancaster to be an incredibly prosperous community, as the low-lying lands along the river were used for agriculture very successfully. Unfortunately, over the next 200 years, perspectives on the river changed for the worse. Instead of being viewed as a resource that should be valued and stewarded and cared for, it became seen as a resource to exploit, a resource to use. And in the 1960s, the Nashua River was literally one of the 10 most polluted rivers in the country. One of the big issues, you see the photo on the right is the North Nashua in Fitchburg. At that time, mills along the river were allowed to dump their effluent right into the water. It's called point source pollution. Essentially, you have an outfall pipe dumping in. And there were a lot of paper mills along the river at that time. And so that's where you have the stories of the river changing colors based on what the paper was running at the time. This is an image that Heather shared on the left of a activist walk in Lancaster a number of years ago. And Heather shared that she's in the corner there in the striped top.
1970.
1970.
We took a ride down the Nashua River, and we started up at the place called Searstown, Whitney Field, and we rode down in canoes, and we picked up debris as we found it. And down here in Lancaster, we put it into a wooden casket and then walked it down the main street to the rotunda of what was then Atlantic Union College, the administration building, to rest it.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's a wonderful story. So as you see, the river was really in terrible condition. I mean, one of the things, again, because of this discharge, the sludge on top was so thick that small animals could run across. The highest form of life was a sludge worm. It was rated U, unfit for any usage, including transporting human waste, and the property value was rated as 0 if it was along the river. So many people thought we should just give up on the river. But fortunately for the river and for all of us, there was someone who's here with us today who had a different vision. And Marion, the Nashua River Watershed Association, began as a grassroots cleanup effort led by Marion, who was activist from Groton at the time. And here's some images of Marion. One of the things that the cleanup committee and the Nashua River Watershed Association has always believed is that one needs to find like-minded people that share your vision. And then you work together, and you work together with people who want to work towards that vision, and you work with people who are on the other side to come to a consensus about how you can improve things like this. So here's Marion on the left in the boat with Senator Kennedy, taking him out for a tour. The image on the bottom right is from Marion and the Work of 1,000, a film that was made about her efforts to clean up. And then the middle top is Marion along the banks of the river. Again, on the note of working with others, one of the people who was a key part of these early efforts was Bill Farnsworth and his wife Bill here in town. Bill initiated the Nashua River Study Committee in 1962. He was dubbed the father of the Greenway Plan, and he was one of the incorporators of the Nashua River Watershed Association. And I think when I wrap up the presentation portion, I invite people to ask questions, and Marion can set me straight if I've got anything that's not quite right. So today, thanks to the effort of the group, as well as the passage of the Clean Water Act, the river's health really significantly improved. Today, the rivers are environmental, recreational, and economic assets for the communities in the watershed. People love to paddle, to fish, and there's a tremendous amount of wonderful walking trails on the greenways that go along the river. During that time, the Nashua River Watershed Association evolved as well. We were founded in 1969 as a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're a little over 50 years old today, and our mission continues to be that we work for clean water and open spaces for human and wildlife communities, and our goal is to sustain mutual economic and environmental well-being in the watershed. One of the things that I think Marion had a great vision on is that it wasn't an either or. Could we have economic prosperity or a clean environment? They go hand in hand. And so that's one of the things that the association is very cognizant of. This is a map of the Watershed Association. It's 538 square miles, includes 32 communities. And I will walk over here. So it starts, this is the Wachusett Reservoir down here. And the South Nashua flows out of that. And here in Lancaster, where we are, here's the North Nashua River, a major tributary. That flows north to south. They come together, form the main stem, and it flows and continues to be up here until it joins the Merrimack River in Nashua. And then where you see this thicker area here, this is behind a dam in Pepperell, so it's an impoundment area, so it's a little bit wider, flatter water as a result of that. Today, the NRWA has a lean professional staff. We have 10 staff members, about 6 full-time equivalents, and we work with dozens of incredibly dedicated volunteers to do water protection, land protection, and environmental education programs. This year is our 30th continuous year of our volunteer water monitoring program. We have trained volunteers who go out and sample sites on the main stem of the Nashua and the tributaries. They go out first, they observe the conditions. What's the river flow like? What are the conditions? Are there signs of wildlife? They take samples, and then we go back and measure these criteria: bacteria, oxygen, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, and temperature. And we use those criteria to evaluate the water quality for recreational usage, aquatic life, and plant life. 10 years ago, in June, Congresswoman Nikki Tsongas, during Rivers Day, gave a citation to the Watershed Association for being 20 continuous years of having this program, and the person that came to accept it was Bob Woodstone. Bob Woodstone was one of our very first monitors 30 years ago. He continues to monitor today with a team of 2 other folks from Clinton. And the sites that we monitor are the North Nashua at the Pelekia Conservation Land and the Weeki Brook near where the dam was removed. So those are the 2 spots that we're monitoring now.
Yeah.
We take the data that we gather and we create what we call our report card. This is our water quality report card. And we put this together and we share it with the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and the public via our website, and some newspapers will publish it. One of the things that's really impressive about our program is that it has a very stringent quality assurance plan. So state agencies will accept our data, and they don't routinely do that, but we have sampled more sites and more longevity on that. So they're very pleased to have it. I can just tell you a little bit about how this works. So down the left, you have the town and the state. This tells you the water body that's being sampled, and this is a description of the site. So you see Pelekia Conservation Land and Weeki Brook. Across the top, you have a system that lets you know at a glance what the water quality was. This is for the E. coli bacteria. And so blue is excellent, that's what we're looking for. Green is good, yellow is fair, and red is poor. Another really important piece of information is this shading across the top. We sample for 7 months. We sample from April till October. And what we indicate with that shading is whether or not there's been a rain event in the preceding days. And the reason for that is that the source of pollution today has changed. Instead of being an outfall pipe, it's what we call non-point source pollution, which is runoff from roads and fields. So what happens is if we have a heavy rain and it washes quickly over the ground, it can wash contaminants into the water. And what we often see is a spike in bacteria for that period of time, which then settles out as the water moves through. And that's exactly what you see when you look at the 2 sites here in Lancaster, is we had excellent water quality here and here. Then you can see we had rain events, and that probably also coincides, it's the summer months, so the flow in the river tends to be lower, which means there's less to dilute the pollutants that wash in. And what you see happening is, get back to my Pelekia spot here. Okay, so what you see happening is you get a spike in bacteria, red, during that rain event. And then what we watch for is we want to see it settle down again. So when you see it did already, it went down here and returned to a fair condition. What we do for this data is we use it as an indicator data. And what we'll watch for example, is if it doesn't settle down, then that tells us maybe there's something else going on. So for example, out in Leominster, there was a period of time where we had a big spike and it didn't settle down again. So we did what I call sort of like CSI water department. We went out with the Leominster Water Department and kept sampling, essentially bracketing closer and closer areas to try and understand what the source of the pollution was. And it turns out at the time there was an illicit hookup from either a bathroom or a car wash, and that was the source of the bacteria. So sometimes it's easily resolved like that. Sometimes it's more challenging. Monusnock Brook in Leominster continues to have bacteria challenges. And we've identified, they've done DNA testing using some equipment from the EPA, and it's not human source, so they're trying to understand what it is, and that's an ongoing challenge.
Can I ask, what is the time, I can't read the dates, but how long does it take to get back into the blues from a red event?
From a red event, what we typically say is about 3 days from like an extreme to run through.
Okay.
But some of this depends on, at the top, there was another rain event the next day, so that probably washed a little bit more in. So we're really looking for kind of that bell curve for it to settle down.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions on that? Okay. One of the other threats to the river's health is invasive plants. The biggest issue in the Nashua is invasive water chestnuts, which is a plant that has really spiky seed. It has an incredible rate of reproduction, and so one single plant can multiply into hundreds and thousands pretty quickly if they're not addressed. And then what happens is it forms a dense mat. This is Pepperell Pond up in Pepperell, and what happens is it grows and it covers the surface like that. So it's obviously not good for recreational usage, and it's not good for the plant and aquatic life because it's choking out the healthy plants that we want to be there. So like a lot of things, the best way to manage this is the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So what we try to do is what we call early detection and rapid response. We go out and survey stretches of the river, and we document if we see any plants. We remove them by hand, and then we'll go back the next year and we'll look again. And in general, if it's a small area, we can really be very successful at removing them, and the next year they're largely eradicated. However, when that doesn't happen and it gets to be a larger area like this, then we get into a situation where it requires either mechanical pulling or herbicides to deal with it because it's beyond the scope of hand pulling. Another thing we do to improve stream flow and wildlife passage, which is particularly relevant now as we're dealing with extreme weather events from climate change, is we go out and we do culvert assessments. We did this, we got a pilot grant from Mass Environmental Trust to go out and look at stream crossings where streams and rivers flow under the roads, and we're looking to see, can the water pass through well, can wildlife pass through well? And so we were trained in that, and we assessed like 70 culverts, and it went so well, we got a subsequent grant where we were invited to assess 5 culverts in each of the Massachusetts communities. And what worked well about that is the DPW told us which culverts to assess. We assess them, and then where it helps the community is if something comes in like the ARPA funding, and suddenly there is money for an infrastructure replacement. Now they have a hierarchy of needs. And so this, for example, is a culvert replacement that was done up from Pepperell. Okay. Another thing we do that, trying to better understand how our watershed can adapt to the impacts of climate change, is the photo on the top left is the Nissitissit River, and one on the bottom left is the Squannacook River. Both of those are cold water fisheries, meaning they can sustain cold water species like brook trout. And so what they need, though, is to have a sustained cold temperature. And given the changes in temperature in our water right now, what this project is we have data loggers placed in some of these streams and in tributaries so we can understand what areas stay cold and will be a refuge for those species as some of the other waters around them may increase in temperature. One of the great success stories of the Nashua River, and I think incredibly fitting bookend, was in 2019, which is the 50th anniversary of the association's founding. Sections of the Nashua, the Squannacook, and the Nissitissit were designated as partnership wild and scenic rivers, which is really an amazing accomplishment. And Lancaster is one of the 11 riverfront communities that are part of that. In order to seek a wild and scenic designation, rivers have to demonstrate that they have at least one or outstandingly remarkable resource value. And our partnership rivers had 3. Their recreation value for boating and fishing, their ecological values, the cold water fisheries I was just talking about, we have some endangered species, including Blanding's turtles, and the cultural and historic relevance, which is exactly what, the connections here in Lancaster, as well as the story of the river's restoration. In terms of the benefits, what does a wildland scenic designation give us? What's really wonderful about it as a partnership wildland scenic is it doesn't impose a lot of things for the federal government, but it gives us an extra layer of protection. The only thing that's expressly prohibited is new federally licensed dams, which would be like a hydropower dam. So those can no longer take place. The ones that are already there are grandfathered in, and then that specific section is just excluded from the wild and scenic area. It qualifies the rivers for National Park Service funds, and what's really nice is those funds go to the Stewardship Council, and then they're distributed on a grassroots basis. So for example, the Lancaster Land Trust on the latest Stewardship Council disbursement that just happened received $5,000 for improvements at the Cook Conservation Parking area, which is really nice.
Who has been reassigned to, like, I know Alex was in charge for Lancaster to be on that committee. Was somebody assigned, or should we advocate in this room for somebody to be on that?
I asked to be sure, because I know Victoria Petrarca and Alex were both involved at one time, and now that it's the Stewardship Council, Alex, I believe, is still the designated rep, but I think was looking for a replacement, so I think it may be an opportunity.
So that's something, just if there's anybody that's willing to be on that committee. I was on it for a while, early on with Bill Flynn, and it's a commitment of like once a month or something like that, but if somebody could be, to think about it. I know Alex has taken on a lot, so if somebody could alleviate, perhaps be our representative from Lancaster, that would be awesome.
Thank you. One of the things the organization has always had, I think, again, great vision about is that one of the best ways to protect water is to protect land. It serves as a natural filter for the non-point source pollution that we talked about, prevents damage from flooding. You have appropriate greenways and setbacks, and the river rises, then it goes into those areas in the wetlands. And it prevents carbon dioxide, particularly forests, from entering the atmosphere. The NRWA is not a land trust, so we don't own any property, and what we do is we really try to facilitate land protection and land stewardship based on its importance for water protection. So sometimes that might be source water stewardship, a forest, and sometimes it might be a greenway along the rivers and streams. For instance, here in Lancaster, there is a Wiki-Piki aquifer, which is a high-yield water producer. So again, protecting the land that protects that is important. One of Marion's champion causes is greenways. To protect the greenway is the riparian buffer, the vegetated area that goes along the streams and the rivers. And in the 1960s, there was only 2 miles of protected buffer, and now there's almost 200 miles of protected greenway, which is wonderful. This is a map of Lancaster's greenway, and it shows some of these dark areas here along the water would be the greenway, and some of the other lighter shaded areas like this is other protected land. I asked, Al Futterman's our land programs director, and I asked him to get some of the data in the community. And the south and the north branch are 34 and 37% protected as they run through Lancaster, and the main stem is about 40% protected.
I'm just questioning, so there's farmland along the Nashua that has no buffer to the water. And there's portions, I live on the North Nashua, and there's portions that I see across the river that have outflow pipes dumping water off of farmland, which has always been concerning, especially since a couple of the farms use fertilizers. So is there any actions or whatever that you guys take to talk to farm owners about what they're doing?
It's a good question. Thank you for asking. The association is not a regulatory agency, so we don't impose any regulations or follow up. What we try to do is work on conveying best management practices through education. So we do a lot of public outreach presentations on something like what would be a best management practice for agriculture, what would be a best management practice with DPWs in terms of road salts, what would be a best management practice. We went a number of years ago, some of the older buildings here still have storm drains that go down through rivers, and what's the best management practice for that? So that is our approach. I can't, I'm not familiar with the specific situation you're talking about, and I'd be happy to, kind of take some notes on it after the program if you want, and then I can ask questions.
I had a follow-up to
Sure.
that. When I turn on Lunenburg Road, I look over to the left-hand side as I'm heading up toward Route 2, and I see the Nashua winding along there. And when I hear, Greenway, does that mean that maybe someday I'll be able to get out of my car and walk a path all the way up?
Well, I think that's Marion's vision. Clearly.
I read the plan, and I would love to see that, but I understand some of it's privately owned. So how do we convince people to let us do that? I mean, have they been approached to allow a complete pathway? I know if you go up to Cook, you can go in, but before that, I'd like to meander all the way from Lunenburg Road all the way up.
Just on land protection in general, a lot of it is privately owned. So again, we're working to encourage people to make decisions to protect that land on a voluntary basis. So for example, we in the past have been involved with the Forest Legacy Project. And what it is we identify landowners who have parcels of interest. We meet with them, we help them to get the land assessed, and the idea is to have them voluntarily choose to protect it. And if it's a program like when we did Forest Legacy, then there's a way for them to be compensated for that as well, whether they sell a CR outright. Sometimes there's conservation organizations that might own a piece of property, but it's not yet under a CR, which means it could come out, and we work with them to protect it that way. So it is definitely a boots on the ground, public outreach type of approach. One of the things too is it's not static. Once it's protected doesn't mean, okay, it's just protected and one leaves it alone. So one of the things that's important is it needs to have native vegetation to provide that filtration, to prevent soil erosion, to keep the water cooler for the fish that live there and the other aquatic insects. So we've had several riparian buffer restoration projects where we go out to an area that's been, over time eroded and is no longer providing that functionality, and we replant it with native plantings. We have one right now that's going on in 3 sites. We're going to put in 2,500 trees. And one of the things that's really unique, I think, about the watershed is the diversity of the communities. We have incredibly rural communities, we have suburban communities, and we have 2 urban areas, the Fitchburg and Leominster area, and the city of Nashua. And so we are equally committed to protecting the riverfront along the way in both areas. And obviously, we say everything, you're downstream of someone, everyone's downstream of someone. And here in Lancaster, we're certainly downstream of the North Nashua River and care deeply about protecting that. And to the woman in the back who says, how do you get the people involved? How do you clone? We don't want to clone the people, but we do want to get the next, activists involved and stewards involved. And the way we do that is with environmental education, because we feel that no one, in order to get someone to care about and protect it, they need to understand and value the resource. So we are deeply committed to environmental education for youth and for adults, and we, pre-pandemic, we're reaching about 10,000 students a year. Our flagship program is River Classroom, where we take kids out on the river, where they learn firsthand on a hands-on experiential basis about the history and the ecology. For some students in the area, they don't necessarily have access to the rivers, and the schools or the families may not have resources to do that. So we often look for grant funding to provide these programs to the students who most need them, but might have the most limited resources to be able to participate in them. We also have a program called Scientist in Residence, and in this it's a sequential series. We work with the teachers, and the lessons that we teach align with the state science standards, and then we go out with a series of lessons, for instance, about the water cycle, and a lot of it, again, is hands-on experimental labs, so you can see the kids. I think this was Soil Safari, where they're looking at different kinds of soils and what lives in those soils. This model here is something called an enviroscape, and it's a model of a watershed. So the kids see it and they can put pollution on. They might sprinkle like cocoa powder, and then they spray it with a mister, and they can visually see how those contaminants end up in the river. And then they're tasked with creating solutions. So a lot of the solutions might be, a berm, or it might be, plantings to prevent that from happening. We also do a tremendous amount of adult education. We do an awful lot of free walks, family aquatic insects programs, as well as we've been doing a series on climate impact, specifically in our watershed by Zoom, so that's very easy to access. Another thing that the organization is very committed to is outdoor recreation. Again, going back to some of the early goals of the cleanup committee, it was that you have to provide access for people to be able to connect to the river and appreciate it. And so we both protect the resources and we also encourage safe recreation. We have a canoe guide for sale. We have some paddle guides that are free. We often lead walks. This is a shot of the Nashua River Rail Trail and the Squanicook River Rail Trail. So what are the benefits of the Nashua River Watershed Association's work in protecting the resources in our communities? Clearly, the most important and outright benefit is having clean water and open space in our communities for the human and wildlife communities. A secondary benefit is the recreation opportunities, the wildlife habitat. There's great economic benefit from having a healthy environment. People come out for paddling and then they participate in other local businesses while they're out here. And I think it really enhances the community character and quality of life in our area, which I think is the reason many of us are drawn to living here initially or choose to come back, as Heather said, after maybe leaving for a period of time. So looking ahead, as an association, we're really proud of the programs that we provide and the resources that we've protected. We're also really proud to have a board and a staff who is very well respected for their knowledge, their professionalism, and their integrity. There are definitely still challenges ahead, some continuing and some new, and we feel really committed to providing the leadership on those challenges. The biggest challenges we face right now, as I mentioned, is this non-point source pollution. As the area develops more and more, there's more contaminants on the surface, and how do you prevent those contaminants from washing into our waterways? There's many more extreme weather events right now. A program, if anyone has a chance to see it, the last in our climate series is by a man named David Valley, who's the chief hydrologist for the National Ocean and Atmospheric Agency. He has a phenomenal presentation on some of the unique weather patterns in our area and how they're causing extreme events. But that extreme weather means you have a sudden wash of water into the rivers, you might have more flooding. This is where having appropriate culverts comes in, and other impacts of climate change. We talked about if the water warms, how do we help our fish species to adapt? If the temperature's warm, how do we help our plant life to adapt? So what can we ask all of you to do that are here in the room today and clearly have an interest, which we appreciate, is first to go out and enjoy the rivers and greenways. Really, you go out, and one of the things that I think was a perk of the pandemic is I had a few conversations with people who said, I have lived here for 30 years and I used to go north to go, I'd go up into northern Hampshire to go paddling. And during the pandemic, I just discovered the wealth and the beauty of the resources that are right here. So we really encourage people to go out and do that. We always have volunteer opportunities. We talked about the water monitoring program as an ongoing commitment. We have periodic, single day programs. We always need help in the office, so that's a way to be involved. We invite everyone to become a member of the association. We are a membership-based organization, and that provides significant funding for the programs that we offer. And we have about 1,000 individual and business members, which makes us very pleased. And then we ask you to tell a friend. We're a small organization, so we are not investing in marketing. We're spending the money on our programs, and so a lot of the way people learn about what we do is word of mouth. So I guess at this point I would thank you for all of your attention, and I would invite two things. I can either invite Heather, I don't know if you want to come up and speak to this slide, and then I can open up questions. And
Okay, now, when I did all the advertising to build this program,
I put out that we would have a second location where we could all meet once we disperse from here. And it was going to be on Center Bridge Road, and we were going to have a sign installed that would denote on the bridge on the south side the exact location of the meeting of the waters. Of course, like everything has been going lately, we had a delay with the delivery. I believe the sign is fabricated and it was supposed to come a few days ago, but it has not yet arrived. But I have every confidence in Max Zoll from Riganini Zoll. We worked with him many times over in Clinton, and he's going to install it just as soon as he gets it in. So you'll be able to drive by at your leisure and see this new sign, which is also, we have a brochure that we've created that shows the 22 sites of early settlement. And this was one of the sites, but it didn't have any sign. Most of them did have a sign, so now this one will as well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So that's the story, so you don't have to go out and reassemble. And as the weather turns out, I'm just as happy about that, because I don't want to, expose you to the drastic change in the elements there. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, for more information we have on the back table there, I have some information about our current activities as well as upcoming events, some of the walks, family programs, climate programs available by Zoom. We have a free paddle guide, which is if you want to put in at the Petapawa launch, which is in Groton. It's on the Nashua River, and then you can paddle either downstream towards Pepperell and do the oxbows there, flat water, or you can paddle upstream. And then our annual report.
There's just a couple more things. If we know where to go for land trust issues, if you have interest in Lancaster history as the mother town, the Lancaster Historical Society is more than happy to answer any questions or pursue any information that you may need about anything having to do with Lancaster or the mother towns. The daughter towns, I'm sorry, the daughter towns. Yeah, it's getting wrong here. And then the second thing is, Joan, if you can bring it up, I understand that someone is having a birthday in just a few days. I found that out just recently, and we would like to recognize that event. And she happens to be sitting right here in our front row. So, Marion Stoddard, we wish you a happy birthday. Celebrate you as the mother of the whole Nashua River effort here. So enjoy. See us next season. We'll start up again in September, and contact us anytime, anywhere on our website, and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you.
Thank you both.